taught us invaluable lessons, both in and out of the classroom, about subject material, instilled a strong team character, including pride that never dies. Many of you say the same about me, but you said it is now my honor to introduce Stuart Ronald Kaplan, who is a Cardigan pioneer. Stuart graduated in our school's very first class, the class of 1947, and he was the second person to receive a Cardigan diploma. After Cardigan, he attended Kimball Union Academy and then graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. He is an avid historical researcher and antique collector. His interests are very diverse. In 1965, Stuart's first book, Mining, Minerals, and Geosciences, was selected by Library Journal as one of the best 100 technical books of the year. In 1997, Art and Antiques magazine chose Stuart's collection of rare 18th century Napoleonic prisoner of war boxes as one of the year's top collectible treasures in America. In 2016, Christie's auction house sold Stuart's rare antique playing card and game collection, and the Russian government purchased some of the items. The following year, Stuart was invited by the Russian government as the guest of honor for the opening of a new museum in St. Petersburg. After a crash language course, Stuart gave his speech in Russian. Stuart also has written extensively about the Italian Renaissance and the 15th century families of northern Italy. He is currently completing a historical novel about the African slave trade. We are so pleased to welcome back Stuart Kaplan.
There's a reason why I wasn't first graduate, because B for Bailey comes ahead of K for Kaplan, rather than do first graduate. Head of school, Dave McCusker. Assistant head of school, Matt Rankin and David Kerfield. Trustee board president, Diane Wallach. Faculty, administration, attendees of the 50th reunion of the class of 1965. Attendees of the 60th reunion of the class of 1955, and graduates of the class of 2015, parents, family, friends, and honored guests. There are over 4 million ninth graders in the United States, and you are one of those 4 million. But none are as important or have as bright a future as the 63 graduates here today, and I'm going to tell you why. Now that you have successfully completed your Cardigan experience, you are smarter and more mature than when you enrolled at Cardigan. Having lived with your fellow students from 10 countries and 46 cities, you have gained a global perspective. You have learned to respect and value other cultures. You have acquired new social skills. You are more independent. You are more open to new ideas and opportunities. The same independence and openness to new ideas that you learned at Cardigan, I learned at Cardigan 68 years ago. It greatly influenced my life. I will share with you a story about how my willingness to take a chance on an 18th century image from a card turned into sales of $100 million. A single opportunity most people would pass by. And I said, what is this? And I looked into it. And I'm going to tell you the story behind $100 million. I would also share with you how being away from my family for the first time taught me to be independent. And that independence led me to travel at age 18 and lasted for 14 months before I went to college. I am the oldest living graduate, and I'm happy to still be here. My grandparents came from Poland to Russia. One was a tailor, the other was a bricklayer. I was 14 years old, living in the Bronx, an area of New York City where immigrants and first-generation Americans moved to when they left the tenements of the Lower East Side. I attended PS 28, a local public school. I was shy, I lacked confidence. In the afternoons, I hung out on the street corners with my friends. We played a game in the streets called stickball. We used a broom handle for a bat and a pink rubber Spalding ball. The curb was the boundary of the playing field. Manhole covers were the bases, or we chalked out the bases in the street. This is the ball I played with 68 years ago. There you go. Those days are gone for me. Inevitably, every afternoon around 5 o'clock, my mother would shout from the third floor apartment window that immediately I had to come upstairs for dinner. And it was always at that same moment the bases were loaded and it was my turn to bat. To earn a few pennies, on Friday afternoons I would wait outside the local grocery store for shoppers who needed help carrying home their packages. People walking with a limp or using a cane were my best prospects. When we arrived at the shopper's apartment, usually a 5-story walk-up, I might be rewarded with a few pennies or a nickel. I would use the money to purchase an egg cream soda at the local candy store. My early life was the same routine week after week, month after month, all within a 20-block radius in the Bronx. That was my life and my world at age 14. Then, one Sunday morning after my 14th birthday, my father told me to get into the Pontiac. We were going for a drive to Meriden, New Hampshire. Without my knowledge, my father had arranged with Bill Brewster, headmaster at Kilby Union Academy, to interview me as a possible student to attend a new school he was opening called Cardigan Mountain. Bill Brewster was in his late 50s, a large man, and quite intimidating. At the conclusion of the 20-minute interview, Mr. Brewster asked me whether I would like to attend Cardigan. I was not enthusiastic. I shook my head and I said, no, I prefer to stay in the Bronx with my friends. My father was not happy. During the drive home to the Bronx, he didn't say a word to me. 4 months later, he put me on a train at Grand Central Station, headed to White River Junction. The school van picked me up, 20-mile ride to Canaan, and that was the start of my first year at Cardigan. Cardigan opened its doors on September 19, 1946. The entire student body totaled 24 boys. There were only 7 boys in my class. My first days at Cardigan were similar to your first days at Cardigan. There were some tearful moments. No longer was my mother there to button my coat and put on my hat, or to check my forehead to see if I had a fever. No longer was my grandmother there to prepare sad evening dinner of chicken noodle soup and boiled chicken and boiled potatoes. Ironically, that first evening when I arrived at Cardigan, the dinner meal served by Clancy, Cardigan's wonderful chef and Richie Clancy's father, was a cup of chicken noodle soup, chicken and boiled potatoes. I was convinced that my grandmother had sent the menu to Clancy. We all lived in one large building on Canaan Street called The Lodge. The entire school campus was the backyard of the building. There were only 6 teachers. Tuition, parents, listen to this, was $1,100. There were no cell phones, no TV, there was no Instagram or Twitter. The only cloud that I knew was Nimbus and Cumulus. The only connection from the school to the outside world was an Emerson radio in the school lounge. The left knob was the on-off switch and the volume, and the right knob selected the stations. There was a rotary telephone on the table in the hall. 3 members of the 1947 graduating class survived today. We were enrolled at Cardigan for different reasons, just like you. Lou Tobias' father was a hard-working Italian immigrant living on Boston's east side. He wanted a better life for his son Lou, and eventually entered into his father's business. F. Lee Bailey's parents were divorced, and his home life was broken. Lee developed into a dynamic lawyer. Some of you may be familiar with the Sam Shepard case, O.J. Simpson, Patty Hearst, and others. In 1947, there were no football, no basketball, no baseball, no soccer, no lacrosse, no hockey teams at Cardigan. There were no sports facilities. The outdoor activities were limited to 3 possibilities that I had: skiing, hiking, and working on a nearby farm. And working on the farm was not exactly my thing, since I came from the city streets of the Bronx. I really had no idea what to do on the farm. Our most challenging physical achievement was to climb 3,000 feet to the top of Mount Cardigan. Raise your hand if you climbed Mount Cardigan. Thank you. I was convinced when I came back in 1972 for my 25th reunion and again climbed Cardigan Mountain, and it took me twice as long to get to the top. I was convinced that the mountain had doubled in height. Later this afternoon, if I should attempt to climb Cardigan Mountain, I will think it is the tallest mountain in North America. After Cardigan, I attended Kimball Union and graduated high school. Then, after having traveled on my own, I went to France at age 18. I rented a room in Paris on the left bank. I enrolled in the Sorbonne, and during the following 14 months, I studied French, language, art, and history. On summer holidays, I hitchhiked 2,000 miles through 14 countries, staying in 70 different cities. For Christmas, I traveled south to Marseille, where the weather would be warmer. But when I arrived, it was rainy and cold, and I learned that a ship called the Ville d'Alger was sailing that afternoon to Algiers in North Africa. I purchased a 4th class ticket. 4th class was steerage at its worst. You were confined to one large room at the lowest level of the ship. No seats, no benches, no beds, no fresh air. You sprawled on the floor for 18 hours. There were hundreds of adults and crying children. No one could sleep. The sea was rough, passengers were sick, but I made it through. After all, at age 18, we can do anything. When we arrived the following morning in Algiers, I rented a room at the Hotel Dauphine in the Kasbah. It cost 400 French francs, equivalent to $1.14 a night. Again, no heat, no hot water, no problem for me. In the evening, when I wanted the bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling of my room to be turned on, I shouted down the hallway to the front desk, and the concierge would turn on the electricity for 10 minutes, and then it would automatically go off. During this time, my father believed that I was in Paris, visiting museums, and absorbing French culture. I spent several days wandering the Kasbah wearing my red fez cap, but the temperature in Algiers was only 50 degrees, and I needed to go further south where it would be warmer. I learned about a single track of railway that departed once a day into the Sahara Desert to a town called Jolfa. It was a 300-kilometer, 7-hour ride to the edge of the Atlas Mountains. When we arrived at Jolfa, it was in the middle of a cold wave with snow flurries. I decided to go further south. I located a rickety bus that was going to an oasis called La Guat. The bus driver drove over sand drifts in the Sahara Desert for several hours during the night. Every so often, the bus driver would turn on the headlights, come to a stop, and a person with flowing white robes and a turban appeared out of nowhere and boarded the bus. La Guat is located where the northern fringe of the Sahara meets the southern edge of the Saharan Atlas Mountains. A walled fortress runs around the 625 acres. To celebrate New Year's Eve 1950, I went into the desert and walked around the outside of the oasis until I came back to the entrance. What I remember most about that midnight walk on New Year's Eve in the Sahara Desert, that it was very, very quiet, very, very lonely, and I knew that I was never, never going back to life in the Bronx. When I returned to the States in 1951, I received my bachelor's degree from Wharton. Then I worked on Wall Street for 10 years. I told you at the beginning of my talk, I would share with you the details of a $100 million event that changed the direction of my business career. In February 1968, I attended Spielwarenmesse, the annual international toy fair in Nuremberg, Germany. On the last day of the fair, an exhibitor from a small Swiss printing company showed me a deck of tarot cards, strange 18th century images. It piqued my curiosity to the point that I imported thousands of copies of the deck and I resold the deck to bookstores. I left Wall Street and started my own publishing game company. I wrote several books about the art and the allegorical meanings on the cards and the 15th century Italian families who commissioned the original card, the Viscontis, the Sforzas, and Napoleonis. The book sold over 1 million copies. I published hundreds of variations of the card. I commissioned art from dozens of artists, and in the end, and including up to now, I've sold over $100 million of these cards. If I had not been open to new ideas that February in Switzerland, I would have missed this life-changing opportunity. So think about that as you go through the next couple of years. What opportunity is going to come your way, and don't miss that opportunity. My company continues to flourish today in its 46th year of publishing. We now publish over 400 different printed decks of cards. 2 of my 5 children have joined the company, and I have 7 grandchildren. My sons, Michael and Christopher, are here today, along with Matthew, my grandchild. Why was Cardigan so significant to me? It was a 180-degree turning point for a skinny, shy kid from the Bronx to a confident, self-sufficient, adventuresome person who embraced new ideas, people, and experiences. Keep your mind open for every opportunity. As you leave Cardigan, be bold. Lift your expectations. Take chances. Do not allow the fear of failure to hold you back from achieving your goals. The Cardigan experience has made you a stronger and better person. After I returned to Paris from Algiers, I wrote a letter to my father. Here's where Richard comes up. Well, you're going to read it for me. Charlie Moore said last night, it's okay to cry. Because sometimes it's tears of joy. I'll share with you a few sentences of what I wrote to my father. This year, living in Paris and traveling throughout Europe has been an amazing experience. I realize now that your decision to take me out of my little world in the Bronx and to enroll me in Cardigan was a major turning point in my life. I did not recognize its importance at the time. Thanks to Cardigan, I gained confidence, I became independent, I grew as a better person, prepared for whatever life might hold for me. You opened up the world to me. For that, I am forever grateful, and I love you, the son. If you haven't thanked your family today, it might be a perfect time after this ceremony to thank them for what they have done for you. Because years from now, you will really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to be here with us today. Imagine how proud we are that you are Cardigan's oldest living alumnus. And boys, you heard some very good advice from an impressive person. Keep an open mind. I think the other piece of advice is listen to your parents.